Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story. It's a brand new week, and we're in a brand new book. I'm with Alyssa Bream and Sheryl Daughety, and we are looking at the book of Ecclesiastes. So Ecclesiastes, the theme, most of the books have had like a single word theme. It's kind of hard to nail down a single word, but the if vanity might be the word, but that anything apart from God is vanity. Everything else is vanity if God's left out. So, from the best we can understand, this is kind of like at the end of Solomon's life, looking back, and he reminisces about the good things and the bad things, the wise things and the stupid things that he did, and he talks about how a lot of the work that he did, the wealth that he accumulated, um, ultimately gets left behind, when we die. And despite the pleasures that he has had around him, he's reminding people that God is the most important, because what you see is at the end of his life, he deviates away from God, as he gets older instead of drawing closer to God. And so he kind of sums it up. That's what the whole book is about, is that the true meaning of life is when we strive for wisdom, righteousness, and reverence for God. That should be our ultimate goal. And so today's reading would have been Ecclesiastes 3. And this is probably, in my opinion, is the most famous piece of Ecclesiastes. Or at least that's what I would say. It gets read often at funerals for some reason. Mainly because there's a time to live and a time to die, that piece of it. But there's so many other pieces of this. And so I'll read a little bit of it, and then we're going to talk about this. It says, "For everything there is a season, a time for every activity under heaven, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to harvest, a time to kill, and a time to heal, a time to tear down, and a time to build up, a time to cry, and a time to laugh, a time to grieve, and a time to dance." And it just goes on for several verses talking about different times. So the question that I want us to jump in with today is this question: how do you determine what season you're in? So he tells us there's lots of seasons of life. How do you know what season? How do you determine what season you're in? Maybe when a season is changing. How do you specifically determine those things, or what kind of advice would you give to somebody who was questioning that?
I am very much a gut reaction person. So there's a lot of times where it's been like a gut change where like instantly like there's like, oh my goodness, it's time to do this. And like that is the change that happens. And I know that's not how it happens for everyone, but for me that tends to be the way it happens. Like when we decided we were going to move from Cleveland to Iowa, it was like one conversation that Tyler and I had, and we were like, it's time. And it was like, boom, it was like time to move and to do something different. Not that there hadn't maybe been a few talks about it, but like it was a fairly like, this is the right thing to do. And it was just kind of a gut thing that it was a different season in our life.
I would say we've probably made some decisions the same way based on a recognition of what season it is, I think. And I feel like self-awareness is also part of that. I think you can't keep your head down all the time, just trying to accomplish whatever it is you're doing, because if you do, you're going to miss everything in the periphery, which is what's going on in your life and in the lives of everybody around you, which kind of signifies what season you're in. And one particular one I can think of, especially for parents, is like when your kids are babies and toddlers, and it feels like it is all consuming,
Never going to end.
Right. And it affects every single aspect of your life at the time. But I think that if you have the ability to recognize the fact that that is just one season and that it's going to pass and move on, it makes it easier to enjoy all the good stuff during that season. But I think it also helps you know, okay, things are always going to be this way. You can endure it a lot better.
Yeah. So you two just talked about seasons where you chose to change into a season. How do you realize when a season has changed and you didn't choose it? So you're talking about one that I don't think parents often even realize until, okay, they're in the middle of a new season with a kid, you know, because you don't get to choose that they're getting older
That's
and,
right.
and that they're going to change. And I believe I'm right. The three of us are about 10 years apart. It's about 10 years from me to you, about 10 years from you to her, roughly. It's a little less than that, but
I
not
can't remember how old you are.
not exactly. But it's pretty close. And we're all at, when it comes to parenting, like I have 3 grandkids, all that are older. Is Judah 8?
Almost.
Almost 8. So my youngest, well, now I have another, but the 3 older boys are as old as Judah or older. You know, my oldest grandson's only a year behind your youngest son, and you've got one getting ready to graduate high school, which is a whole nother, you know, place. And so now I'm just counting grandkids, you know, at this point. And so I don't think sometimes you realize until you're in the middle of it, oh, this is a different season. You know, when you don't wake up one day with babies and toddlers, and then you wake up the next day with kids who can take, this is exaggeration, semi take care of themselves. Like they can get dressed in the morning and, you know, clean their room. And
I woke up one day to my 2-year-old making himself a bowl of cereal.
yeah, nice.
That was exciting.
Yeah, see that?
And my 7-year-old hadn't ever done that before.
Oh, wow. And you know, so
it does change overnight sometimes.
Yeah, and some of that's personality driven,
Yes.
isn't it? Like that is, you get, sometimes I think seasons of life are dictated by other people's personality changes. You know, I heard a man say, and I read in a marriage book, he was talking about, you know, you will be married over your lifetime to 6 or 7 different people, even if you stay with the same person, you know, because over time you just change, you know, and you don't always realize it. It's interesting. My wife said Sunday night we were home, and for whatever reason, some people got a hold of, I said something the Sunday before we're preaching this about how I had aged over the years that I've been pastor. My hair's turning white, you know, and some people started sending pictures of me 10 or 12 years ago. My hair is still pretty red. And anyway, she said, I don't want you to take this wrong. She said, you're the best version of you right now, like that you've ever been. And I was like, why would I take that wrong? Like, I hope that's the case. But sometimes you're not prepared. Sometimes people do change for the better. Sometimes they change for the worse. And I wouldn't think everything had gotten better. But how do you help somebody who's in a new season that they didn't plan for? You know, maybe they lost a job. Maybe I have a friend right now who's my age. He's got just a few months to live. You know, his wife's life is changing. His grandkids' life are changing. You know, that you didn't sign up for. A health problem that you had, you know, the loss of a loved one. I was talking to a couple in church the other day, and they lost a child and a grandchild within 10 days of one another. And, you know, and the one thing I've learned to say is we were not designed to do that. Like we just weren't designed to bury our children and our grandchildren. And I watched my grandmother, at the funeral of 2 of her sons, you know, over time. She lived to be in her 90s, and wouldn't be uncommon. So what do you tell people who find themselves in a season that they didn't choose, you know, that they're in a really difficult moment?
I mean, ultimately, I think you have to rely on your faith and the belief that God is going to comfort you and get you through whatever it is. I don't know then in those types of situations, you're necessarily trying to help somebody find the bright side, because sometimes there's not one, especially in a situation like that where you're dealing with death and it's unexpected, you know. But I do think that nearly every situation does provide us an opportunity that we can take advantage of if we see it. if we can find it.
Yeah, unless somebody who is going through a really dark situation specifically asks for advice, I tend not to give advice to people who are actively going through a situation because you just need to be there for them.
Yeah.
And so I think what I tend to do is just, if it's like a friend going through something, just send them a message and be like, hey, I'm praying for you. I'm thinking of you. Is there anything I can do to help you? Like, I think that's what trying to give answers, it becomes trite, like trying to figure out the purpose of all of this, of wealth, of all these things that are going to go into this book. It just becomes something that is pointless to try to find the meaning in the moment. You just have to be there to go through it with them.
Can you, either of you, give an example where you had to make an adjustment, where you ended up in an unexpected season and you're like, I hadn't planned for this? And it doesn't have to be a tragedy. You know, it could be a positive thing. I didn't plan for this. I can think of one for you.
That's why I was laughing to myself. I didn't know how appropriate that'd be to talk about.
Well, you know, oddly enough, so I'll set you up. I'll take some of the pressure off. Okay, I'll set you up. So right now we are in a season of numerical growth here at the church. And we've gone through, in my time as pastor, 2 other specific times that I can point to, like on a chart, and show where we went up like that. The first time, we were completely ignorant. Like it won't for lack of effort. You know, I think we ended up with like 45 services at one time. Is what it felt like. Yeah. You know, just trying to accommodate people and continue to grow. In hindsight, some of the things we did were just ignorant and unwise, and it probably cost us some momentum. And we didn't address some other things. The second time we can see that is in 2019, leading up to COVID. And one of the things, as when we have a meeting this afternoon that I'm going to talk about, is that in hindsight right now, COVID probably saved us, because it gave a hard stop. And I'll just speak for myself. I'm at a different place. I'm in a better place. I'm evaluating things differently than I think I would have even in 2019. Staffing is different. You know, we went through some real tragic situations COVID year in the church. I mean, everybody, you had a personal challenge. You know, you had a baby born like the first week, if I remember right, of COVID shutdown, or second week.
With complications.
Yeah, with complications, right. You know, and that created problems. But here at the church, we went through some staff transitions, and that's what we were laughing about, because you kind of got thrown into a job. You had been the children's pastor here before. I don't think it was on your radar to come back and be children's pastor.
Not anytime soon.
And when you came back,
it was for 3 months.
It was intended to be temporary.
About 3
That's
years
right.
ago.
Yeah, it was intended to be temporary.
Yeah.
And it wasn't something that you asked for. I think in conversations you and I had, it became, at least from my perspective, evident that you needed to be in that role. But I would suspect, and you have not shared some of these things with me, I would suspect it required some personal adjustments that you hadn't planned to make right at that particular time, because you had a daughter that's winding down high school that, you know, I don't know, if you want to talk about it, you can.
Well, at the time she was really just in the beginning of high school.
Right.
Well, long story short is that so we homeschool and have for like 11 or 12 years now, I guess. But when I left, it was basically because I felt like I couldn't do both of those things as well as I wanted to. And so, yes, when you called and asked me, would you come step back in for a few months just to kind of keep everything afloat, I even said to you then, I need to call you back in like 2 days. Like, I need time, because my heart was not willing, because I was perfectly happy and satisfied, and everything had been pretty smooth sailing. And it had been confirmed to me that I was doing the right thing then, despite the fact that I did miss my job. But I just had to say, okay, God, you're gonna have to make my heart willing, because I don't want to do it. And in 24 hours, I felt completely different about it, because he made it obvious to me that was what he was calling me to do at that very time. And I could choose to walk away from it, but I'm sure there would have been consequences on either or both sides. And, since then, there's been some ups and downs too, but I have felt sure and continued to go back to God and say, okay, you need to give me the time and the energy and the wisdom to do this, if this is the path you want me to continue on.
And I remember having a conversation with you about it, and I said, we need your voice on staff.
Mm-hmm.
And then you came back to me a little bit later, like a few months, because I think it was when you're deciding, like, what's the path, do we need to do a search for a children's pastor, or like, how is this all going to work out? And you said that meant something, that it was like you understood that, I don't know, that you were wanted on staff. And I don't know if that's not the right way to put it. Obviously you're wanted on staff, but that your voice was important and you had a different view than the rest of us in that room,
right?
Which was needed. That was a tough situation with lots of changes happening, just one right after another, that I think like half of the staff ended up in the hospital at some point that year.
Was
crazy. Right?
Yeah.
You were in the hospital.
Jay
was in the hospital.
In a period of from
it was a
between
rough year to
August,
be on staff.
Between August and December. Well, November. Between August and November. So the end of August, September, October, November, in a 4-month period, we either lost staff or they ended up in the hospital, like serious,
right?
Mm-hmm.
Amounts. Jay could have died.
Mm-hmm.
And in hindsight, like, I'm just going to tell you that, and I have to trust God's provision, and it could happen today. I'm thankful it happened then and not now. Like, can you imagine the chaos it would create today if all of those events happened again in a 120-day period?
Yeah.
Let's not talk about that.
No, I mean, right.
No, I know.
Right. And so you look back on it and you have to trust God's timing. There's a time for everything. And you have to believe that God had understood some of those things had to be worked through. And it was better when we were just coming back to church and nobody much was in the building and it really wasn't going to crush us than it was, today when we're trying to get as many people in here as we possibly can.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, a lot of that stuff is often in preparation for what's to come.
That's right.
You just can't tell. You can't see it at the time.
That's right. I would agree. Well, thank you for joining us today. I hope you'll be back tomorrow as we continue a conversation in the book of Ecclesiastes.